The night Garrett Solis walked into the Vancouver Heritage Architecture Gala, he was wearing the same gray blazer he'd worn to his wife's funeral 3 years ago. It still fit. That was the thing about grief, it didn't change your shoulders. His daughter, Bia, had ironed it for him that afternoon, standing on the step stool she still needed even at 8 years old, pressing the lapels with the kind of concentration she usually saved for her coloring books. She hadn't said much. She rarely did when she sensed he was nervous. She just ironed, humming something tuneless, and when she was done, she stepped back and looked at him the way his mother used to, like she was deciding whether or not he'd pass inspection. "You look good, Daddy," she said. "Yeah? You look like someone important." He'd laughed at that. He didn't feel like someone important. He felt like a structural engineer from Burnaby who'd been nominated for a regional award he wasn't sure he deserved, attending a party full of architects and city planners and people who knew how to hold champagne glasses without looking like they were afraid of dropping them. But Bia had said he looked important, and so he'd kissed her forehead, thanked his neighbor Mrs. Farrow for watching her, and driven 40 minutes into the city with the radio off, rehearsing nothing because there was nothing to rehearse. He wasn't giving a speech. He was just supposed to show up, shake some hands, eat something small on a cracker, and come home. Simple enough. He found parking 2 blocks from the Fairmont and walked the rest of the way through the November drizzle with his collar up, already regretting not bringing an umbrella. Inside, the ballroom was the kind of beautiful that made Garrett feel like he'd wandered into someone else's life. Chandeliers like frozen waterfalls, white tablecloths with centerpieces that probably cost more than his truck payment, a string quartet in the far corner, playing something he almost recognized. Around him, 400 people in formal wear moved and laughed and clinked glasses with the ease of people who did this sort of thing every other Thursday. Garrett got a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray, found a spot near the edge of the room where he could see the exits, and told himself he'd stay exactly 90 minutes. That was when he saw her. She was sitting alone near the windows overlooking Burrard Street, her chair angled slightly away from the nearest table, as though she'd been there a while and hadn't been invited to move closer. She was wearing a navy blazer over a silk blouse, the kind of outfit that belonged at this event, at this table, at this exact gathering, and she held a glass of champagne she hadn't touched. In front of her, a small name card from the event program sat unopened on the tablecloth. What struck Garrett wasn't that she was in a wheelchair. What struck him was the expression on her face. He knew that expression. He'd worn it for most of the year after Claire died. It was the look of someone who had made a decision to come somewhere difficult, and was now wondering quietly whether it had been a mistake. He stayed where he was for a moment. Then someone across the room waved him over. A colleague from the firm, Bart, who had a habit of talking for 20 minutes when 5 would do, and Garrett spent the next half hour listening to Bart explain the structural failings of a project neither of them had worked on, nodding at the appropriate moments and watching from the corner of his eye as no one approached the woman by the windows. Not one person. Not the event organizers who passed within arm's reach, not the couple who sat at her table for 10 minutes, conversed entirely with each other, and then left. Not the young man with the tray of canapés who steered around her as though she were part of the furniture. She didn't flag anyone down. She didn't adjust her chair or look at her phone. She just sat there, her champagne untouched, watching the room with an expression so carefully neutral it had to have taken practice. Garrett excused himself from Bart. He got 2 plates of food from the hors d'oeuvres table, more than he needed, but it gave him a reason to approach, and walked over to the windows. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said, "but I've been standing over there for 20 minutes, and I cannot figure out what any of these things are, the little triangle ones especially." She looked up at him. For a fraction of a second her expression shifted, not quite suspicion, not quite surprise, but something between them, and then it settled into something quieter. "The triangles are smoked salmon on rye," she said. "The round ones with the green are cucumber and dill cream cheese. So basically all the things my daughter would refuse to eat." The corner of her mouth moved, not a full smile, but something. How old? 8. Going on 45. He glanced at the empty seats at her table. "Are you expecting anyone, or would you be willing to save me from standing alone for the rest of the night?" She looked at him for a moment, the kind of look that was doing more thinking than it appeared to, and then she nodded at the chair across from her. "Sit," she said, before you drop those plates." He sat. Her name, she told him, was Margot. She offered it the way people sometimes offered first names when they wanted to be a person first and a title second. And he accepted it the same way, giving her his own name without his firm or his award nomination or any of the things that usually came attached to it at these events. They talked about the food, then about the building, the Fairmont's ballroom ceiling, which Garrett couldn't help noticing had a water stain near the east cornice that had probably been there since the 90s. Margot noticed he'd noticed. "Runs in the family," she said. "What does?" Looking at ceilings instead of people. He laughed, and this time she did too, and for a moment neither of them said anything, and it was the most comfortable silence Garrett had experienced in a room full of 400 people since he couldn't remember when. He told her about Bia, about the blazer ironing, the tuneless humming, the step stool. Margot's listened with the focused attention of someone who was genuinely interested and not just waiting for their turn to speak. "She sounds like someone who's been taking care of you," Margot said. "She has been," Garrett admitted, "for longer than an 8-year-old should have to." He hadn't meant to say that much, but it came out the way things sometimes came out when you'd been holding them long enough, not as a confession, just as a fact that had finally found the right room. Margot was quiet for a moment. Then, "My father used to say that children who learn to take care of people early either burn out or become extraordinary. There doesn't seem to be a middle option." Which one was he hoping for? "He was hoping," she said carefully, "that I wouldn't have to learn it quite so young." Something passed between them then, not pity, not shared grief exactly, but the particular understanding of two people who have both had to become tougher than they wanted to. Garrett recognized it the way you recognized a song from your childhood. You didn't always know the words, but you knew the feeling. "Is she here tonight?" Margot asked. "Your daughter?" "No, she's at home with my neighbor. Probably asleep by now, which means she's definitely not asleep." He checked his watch. "She'll want a full report in the morning. She'll want to know if I talk to anyone. What will you tell her?" "I'll tell her I had salmon on a triangle and talked to the most interesting person in the room." Margot's looked at him steadily. "You don't know that." "I've been here 2 hours," he said. "I'm confident." Across the room, the evening's program was beginning. The master of ceremonies, a man with very good posture and a microphone he held like a trophy, was welcoming the assembled guests to the 14th Annual Vancouver Heritage Architecture Awards. He spoke about legacy, about the buildings that shaped a city's memory, about the responsibility of the people in this room to think about what they were leaving behind. Garrett only half listened. He was watching B's face in his memory, the careful press of the iron, the checking of the lapel, and feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time at one of these events, something like he was supposed to be here. Then the MC said a name. Not his name. Hers. And this year's Meridian Foundation Lifetime Achievement Award goes to Margot Devereux, whose firm has been responsible for the accessibility redesigns of 14 heritage buildings across British Columbia over the past 2 decades, and whose work has permanently changed how this province thinks about who our public spaces are actually built for. Applause. Substantial applause. The kind that started in pockets and then spread because people were genuinely glad, not just politely glad. Garrett turned to look at Margot's. She was already looking at him, and for the first time all evening, the careful neutral expression was completely gone. In its place was something that might have been embarrassment, or relief, or the very specific face of someone who had not been expecting to be seen quite so clearly tonight. "Margot Devereux," he said. "Yes," she said, "the Margot Devereux. There's only the one." He thought about all the people who had walked past her, the couple who'd sat at her table and spoken only to each other, the man with the canapé tray, the event organizer who'd angled around her chair. He thought about how she'd sat here with her untouched champagne and her unopened program, and none of them had known, and it hadn't mattered to any of them in either direction. They hadn't been cold because she was important. They hadn't been kind because she was important. They'd simply looked and seen someone they didn't need to engage with and moved on, and here she was. The reason half the heritage buildings in this city now had ramp access and widened corridors and the kind of thoughtful, dignified entry points that didn't announce themselves as accommodations but simply existed as good architecture. "You should go up," he said. "I know." She didn't move immediately. "I wanted a moment first, take it." She did. 30 seconds maybe. looking out the window at the rain-blurred lights of Bird Street. Then she straightened, a small exact movement, and set her champagne glass down on the table with the quiet finality of someone who had been waiting all night to put something down. "Thank you for the company, Garrett," she said. "Thank you for explaining the triangles." She laughed. A real one this time. And then she moved toward the front of the room and the applause rose again, and every head in the ballroom turned to watch Margot Devereaux accept her award. Garrett stayed where he was, at the table by the windows, and watched. He'd expected the evening to end there. Collect his coat, say goodbye to Bart, drive home in the rain, arrive to find Bea very much awake and full of questions. Instead, 40 minutes later, he was standing near the coat check when someone said his name. He turned. It was a woman he didn't recognize, mid-50s, efficient posture, the kind of lanyard that meant she worked for the foundation. "Mr. Solis, Margot Devereaux would like a word before you leave if you have a moment." He followed her to a quieter corner of the lobby, where Margot was waiting beside a window, her award, a block of engraved glass, resting in her lap. "I wanted to tell you something," she said when he reached her. "Okay, when I arrived tonight, she paused, choosing the word with care. "I was reconsidering being here. I've been coming to this event for 11 years, and for 11 years I have sat at a table and been invisible until my name is called, and then visible again, and then invisible, and I had decided that this was probably the last year I would bother." Garrett didn't say anything. He knew better than to fill that kind of space with reassurance. "And then you came over with your 2 plates of food and your very obvious question about the salmon triangles," she said, "and you sat down and you talked to me like a person. Not like someone you recognized, not like someone you were networking with, just like a person. You are a person," he said. "Yes," she said. "I know that. It's remarkable how often I need to be reminded." She looked at him steadily. "Your daughter, the one who irons your blazer, she's the one who taught you that." He thought about it. About Bea at 8 years old, unaware of titles or reputations or the complicated social mathematics of rooms like this one. Just a small person with an iron who had looked at her father and decided he was worth the effort. "I think she did," he said. Margot nodded. "Tell her she did good work tonight." He drove home through the rain with the radio still off, but it felt different this time. Not the silence of rehearsing nothing, just silence, Mrs. Farrow met him at the door with her coat already on and the particular expression of a woman who had been awake much longer than expected. "She's in her bed, Mrs. Farrow said, "but I make no claims about whether she's sleeping." He thanked her and went upstairs and found Bea exactly as predicted, entirely awake, lying with theatrical stillness, eyes closed with too much intention. "I can hear you thinking," he said from the doorway. She opened one eye. "How was it?" He came in and sat on the edge of her bed the way he had every night since she was small enough to need a nightlight. "You know how you said I looked like someone important?" "Yeah. I met someone tonight who actually is someone important, who has spent 20 years making sure that buildings," he stopped, tried to find the version of this she could hold, "making sure that everyone can get into buildings, not just some people, everyone, considered this, like ramps, and doors, and hallways. All of it. That sounds like a good job. It's a great job," he said, "and she's very good at it." Bea was quiet for a moment. Then, "Did she say something nice to you?" He thought about the lobby, the rain-blurred window, the engraved glass resting in her lap, and the way she had looked at him like she was saying something she had been saving for a while. "Tell her she did good work tonight." "She said you did good work today," he told Bea. "The blazer, the ironing, she said to tell you." Bea stared at the ceiling. He could see her filing it away, this piece of information from a stranger who had apparently noticed his daughter without meeting her. "She sounds nice," Bea said finally. "She is," he said. "She's the kind of person who—" He paused. Bea was watching him. "She's the kind of person who sat by herself all night because nobody thought to sit with her. And she was the most important person in the room." Bea thought about this for a long time, long enough that Garrett thought she might have actually fallen asleep. Then, "That's kind of sad, Daddy." "Yeah," he said. "It is, but then you sat with her." "Yeah, I did." She seemed satisfied with this. She pulled her blanket up to her chin and closed her eyes, genuinely this time. "That's a good story," she said. "Get some sleep, Peanut Daddy. Next time take me." "I would have sat with her right away." He leaned down and kissed her forehead and turned off the lamp. "I know you would have," he said. And standing in the doorway of her room with the rain still coming down outside and the city somewhere behind it, He thought that whatever Bia grew up to be, extraordinary or otherwise, she had already figured out the most important part. Some things cost nothing, and some nothing things are everything.